Hello and welcome to this episode of The Interval. Today we are talking with Chris Ensor of Elevate, makers of some of the finest quality lutherie tools available today. Chris Ensor, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join me for a chat. I really appreciate it. I know it's 8:30 here in the evening, but I know it's like 2:30 in the afternoon for you, so I appreciate you taking some time. I wanted to get talking about your life in not only in lutherie, but obviously with Elevate as well. You are a luthier. You build boutique instruments, but you also have a company specializing in lutherie tools.
Yeah.
So let's go right back to the beginning. Talk to me about your journey in lutherie and where that began, or your journey with the guitar in general.
So I've been playing guitar since I was a kid. Not necessarily well, but just kind of a couch player. I was one of those kids growing up that just liked making stuff and was always like I'll make it myself sort of person. So, growing up, I skateboarded and I made all my own ramps. And I was also playing guitar. So one weekend I decided I'll just build a guitar this weekend. Right? I was 17, 18, something like that.
Yeah.
No research, no reading. Went to the hardware store and bought a 2x4 and some 1/4-inch plywood. And Gorilla glued together what ended up being a wall clock on my dad's garage. It's actually still there. But
So was this but it was a guitar shaped wall clock?
It was a dreadnought cutaway.
Nice.
I actually pounded frets into it. I did some pyrography, if I'm saying that right, but I burned in like fret position markers in the shape of crosses instead of like inlaying. Actually tried. It had tuners and the whole thing, and I was so proud of it. I think it was just like the idea of like I made something,
Sure.
but obviously wasn't satisfied. So then I decided a next good point to start at would be an arch top. So I read Bob Benedetto's book through twice during my senior year in high school.
Yeah.
Took some notes and made a really ugly boat anchor when it all settled out. I hadn't seen it.
Are you like from a kind of creative household? Did you have like access to tools as a kid, or like where did that kind of initial, oh, you know what, I'm gonna start cutting some wood up, like where did that come from?
My parents ask that all the time.
Yeah.
My dad is not handy at all. My mom's creative, but like not in a manufacturing sense, more of kind of a crafty sense. So I really don't know where it came from. It's probably somewhere deep within my psyche, and I'm sure some therapist could figure it out.
Right.
But like my parents ask that all the time. They're like, how did you start down this road? Because it doesn't really like make sense with like the family line or anything. My dad had the typical like dad garage that had like an old crappy Craftsman table saw that didn't cut straight, and the handheld belt sander for those like random honeydews where he'd need to get something done. And that's what I used to start. Like it was literally a table saw and a handheld belt sander. I think the sides on that arch top were like a 1/4-inch thick.
Oh, man.
They're maple.
Did you manage to did you bend them, or did you like cut them out of solid, or like?
They're bent, but I think it's more like they're probably like broken in strategic spots and burnt, and then I just sanded that out and called it good. Because I mean, there's no way I bent 1/4-inch thick maple, but it was so thick. I remember like putting all my body weight on it and like doing practically like a push up on the spinning iron, trying to get the thing to move. Uh, and I mean, it was wrought with all sorts of like funny, comical mistakes. My my bending iron was a galvanized pipe with a torch in it, which will work. But I
Yeah.
needed to get it up higher. And being a brilliant 18-year-old kid, grabbed an ammo box that my dad had in the garage, and I didn't even check, and he had live ammunition in it, and I'm heating it up with a glowing torch. So I mean, it's kind of a miracle that I'm not dead, to be honest.
Oh my God.
Uh, I actually routed the dovetail into it, though it probably has like a quarter-inch gap that's filled with like sawdust and CA. Um, but my girlfriend, who's now my wife, my girlfriend at the time, essentially held the guitar over her head because I didn't have a vise, and then I routed it, and
Wow.
the template was just a quarter-inch piece of plywood. I had no bearing on the bit, so it wasn't actually following it like a template bit should. So I don't know how I didn't kill her or myself during the process.
That's
Uh,
impressive. That's some dedication right there.
yeah, and somehow she married me after all of that. Um, but yeah, I mean that was kind of the starting off point. It was the I really want to do this, so I just kept pushing through the mistakes and learning. And
That's
then
that's uh, that's incredible.
yeah, eventually in college I wanted to study abroad, and my dad brought up the idea of lutherie school, and I went to Canada and studied under Sergei de Jong for 5 weeks in his course. And I still play that guitar. That's actually a beautiful playing guitar. Um,
Hmm.
I kind of like got a bunch of the mistakes out of the way that a lot of people have to make at the beginning on those first
Sure.
few attempts. So in that course, I was one of the only ones that left with something that was even halfway refined.
Wow. Because 5 weeks is really not a long time to figure out how to build a guitar and to get something playing.
Right. Um, I think it really came down to Sergei's mastery of it. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
he was one of those guys like to taper the rims on the back for the plate. Uh, he was doing a build along with us for I think like a dealer, and it was an Indian rosewood. And he puts a chisel on the side and whacks it with a mallet, and pretty much gets the taper like first blow. Spends like 30 seconds refining it in a sanding dish, and he's done.
Wow.
And he was one of those guys that he'd walk by and he's like, "You need to take a half a millimeter off of this." And he'd make a mark for like where you need to take it to, and he was on within like a tenth of a millimeter every single time.
That's incredible. I actually met Sergey last month at the Sonor show in Montreal.
Nice.
Um, Yeah, uh, and I'd never met Sergey. I didn't even know what he looked like. I just heard of his reputation,
Right.
and yeah, he's a super interesting dude. And
Yeah.
I also met Jeremy Clark and Mike Kennedy,
Yeah.
who both worked with Sergey, and they were telling me kind of similar tales.
Hmm.
Um, because I guess like hasn't Sergey built like a ridiculous number of guitars, and I
Yeah.
suppose like if you're going to build that rapidly, then yeah, there's no time for setting up jigs and tours. You just go in there with your chisel and your mallet and hope that you're accurate with it, right?
I asked him whenever I first met him how many guitars he's made, and we're in the car. He's driving me from the airport, and he's driving with his knee, rolling a cigarette and licking it, like sealing it and getting all ready while driving, no hands, and answering my question and drinking a cup of coffee. And he's like, I don't know, it probably would have been a good idea to start counting at some point. But that just kind of shows you the type of guy he is. I remember him, which actually, as a side note, Mike Kennedy was the apprentice while I was there, so that was really fun. Mike
Oh,
is an amazing guy. But it was funny. His
Mm.
survey would show us how he'd done stuff for a long time, and instead of like the stuff he did a little bit safer now that he does stuff with students.
Yeah.
And instead to route a dovetail, he would just stick the waist between his knees so that the upper bout's above his legs, and he would just hold it in his legs and route it. And he actually demonstrated it for us while I was there, but it was ridiculous. He builds in such a way that it's just so nonchalant, like, oh yeah, you just build a guitar, and oh by the way, it's world class, and I do it in my sleep.
Yeah, that is some serious chops. And if it works, it works, right?
Right? Yeah, I wouldn't market that to anyone, but he can pull it off. It's amazing to watch.
I mean, I think I worked with Irvin Samoji, and there was so many times in the workshop where he would do similar things. He'd be kind of working in such a way that I kind of like, what, how on earth can you work in that way but get that result? And yeah, I guess when you've been doing it for a certain amount of time, yeah. But anyway, so you did the 5 week course with Sergey, and then did you stay on and work with him, or what came next?
So that was just a short summer in my life. I think that was between freshman and sophomore year in college. And then I came back. It was one of those, like, I wanted to continue building, but at the time, like, I had just got my first apartment. I had no tools. So fast forward a couple of years, my wife and I get married. I have 1 year left in college, and she had just graduated. Uh, we're both from Springfield, Missouri, but I was in school in Nashville. So she moved to Nashville with me. And we got a little apartment, and it had a 1 car garage, and that's what I turned into my first shop. I guess I did build, I think, two before that on a dining room table, much to the annoyance of all of my roommates.
Yeah.
Who didn't like the sound of me sawing wood at like 8 in the morning while they're all trying to get their sleep. But that first little shop was kind of eye-opening to me, especially looking back in contrast now, because I've got a 900 square foot shop on property,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like 200 or 300 square feet, and everything was so conveniently located. Like, you're always just an arm's reach away from whatever you have. And in stark contrast now, like, everything's a little bit of a walk away. 900 square feet is by no means like an industrial warehouse, but it kind of makes you think,
Of
how you
course, yeah.
do stuff and like where the flow is in the shop and making sure that things are efficient. So that first shop is actually something I reference quite a bit mentally.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, I can totally relate to that. The shop that I'm sitting in right now, my shop is 300 square feet. And there's two of us in here. I have
Yeah.
my apprentice Daisy in here as well. And, we certainly get under each other's feet at times, but there's also almost like this balletic kind of dance that we do around each other. It's kind of when you've been working with somebody for a certain amount of time, and you just kind of get to know that, like you say, the flow of the shop, and things just kind of start to fall into place. So you had your first shop, and when was this? Like, what year? What year are we talking?
So that would have been 2009.
Okay.
I graduated in 2010. So I built 4 guitars there, 3 or 4, something like that. In the midst of, fostering a new marriage, graduating college, all sorts of other fun things in your life. But the guitars were definitely appropriately finished for the period of life I was in.
Sure.
So, learning experience. At the time, actually, I don't know if you're familiar with Batson guitars.
The name
They're
doesn't ring a bell.
they're in Nashville, technically right outside. I think they're in Antioch. A friend of mine, Grant, and his brother Corey were running the company at the time, and I was actually going to go on to work for them after college. They build this interesting build where there's no rosette, no sound hole on the top, and one large port on the upper bow.
Mm-hmm.
And Grant has since left the company, and he's building, I think, handmade smoking pipes. And Corey has kind of turned into almost like McPherson level of small factory.
Sure.
But during the time, I was going to go work for them straight out of college, and it fell through. They had an investor that they needed to be able to expand the business, and the business investor fell through. So that was one of those kind of serendipitous moments where my wife really wanted to move back home, and I didn't have a job now because that fell through.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't have a job well, she had a job in Nashville, but it was just kind of like an entry level, pay the bills sort of job. And so it was one of those, like, you just kind of go with the flow and energy in the universe. And it was like, well, I guess we can't stay here.
Yeah.
And then, like, in 2 weeks, all of a sudden, she found a job. I found a good paying day job. We found a house, which is where we still live now. And, like, everything just fell into place. It was weird. It was one of those, like, I knew I wanted to build guitars. I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it full time, like straight out of college. But knowing that I wanted to do it, I had to find a workshop, or I had to find a house small enough that we could afford to build one. And we lucked into this property where they had a 900 square foot shop on property. I put a ton of work into it. It's I don't know how many iterations it's gone through. But it was just this godsend blessing of, like, all of a sudden, like, the pieces just fell into place.
Yeah.
So now we moved in. I eventually put a finished room into the shop. I was able to, build up and have better tooling because at the time I, had every cheap Harbor Freight type of tool you could find, and it was, mangling guitars together instead of building them.
So were you were working a day job and building guitars in every kind of spare hour that you had?
Yeah, so that was the years before we had kids. So a lot of times I would go work my proverbial 8 to 5, which it really wasn't because I was a TV producer, so I worked a lot of nights and weekends. And I worked there for almost 8 years and just kind of slowly ground away, especially if I was working a nighttime gig, I'd work during the day while my wife wasn't home. So we'd see each other occasionally. And I slowly, just built up the shop and refined my process and, got to where I am.
Fantastic. And so moving on to Elevate.
Yeah.
Talk me through the inception of Elevate.
Elevate was one of those things that, like, smacked me in the face, and I kept going, like, get away from me, It's so funny, as a side note. Like, I love the lutherie community, and so many of us are so bad in business.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
I kind of laugh because I have business conversations with our peers all the time, and a lot of it's, how did you start in business, or how do you find the clients that you have? And the answer is always, I don't know. So
things just happen, right?
Yeah, it was just this, like, magical occurrence where, like, orders fell into my lap. But it was kind of that way with Elevate. I had a buddy of mine. Oh, I guess to back up, like, one of those tasks that I always struggled with ever since I left Sergey's was binding. Mm-hmm. And I built, like, every style binding jig there was, except the type that. So while I was still working as a TV producer, my office mate started metalworking. And it was throughout the idea, I'm like, could you make me this binding jig? But I altered it from the type that I used at Staircase to be adjustable, where the guide can move up and down. And he, like, during his nights and weekends in his spare time in his garage for, like, I think it was almost 6 months, he worked on this thing. And I still feel bad to this day. At the time, I wasn't fully committed to the guide holder moving. So I made him make me guides, like different size guides that he turned on his lathe in 10,000th increments.
Oh, wow.
And it was a manual lathe that he turned down himself. I think there were like 48 or 50 of them or something.
Oh my goodness.
And I asked him to hold like a 1 thou tolerance. And he graciously did it for me and asked for almost no money when it was done, which I tried to pay him, but he's one of those sincerely sweet men that will not take money from friends. And so that was kind of like the first iteration. And the guide holder moved, but it didn't have a zero bar. So, like, to reset it back to zero, you had to mount calipers on it and like re-zero it manually. And it was clunky, but all of a sudden I got good binding channels.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, there's something to this. But again, I didn't want to sell tools. I didn't want to make tools. Like, I wanted to build guitars. And I was posting like some build threads, I think, on the acoustic guitar forum. And some of the other builders on the forum like saw it in the background of a photo.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, where the heck did you get that? And so I just like passed on their info to my buddy, and it was like, here, if you want to make some money. And I think like each one took him like a month or two, and he'd like make 25 or $50 on it, you know? And then demand started growing, and he was like, I can't do this. Like, you need to scale up. So I had a friend of a friend who had a CNC in his garage start making them, which unfortunately that didn't work out well either. But at the same time, I tried to sell it to some of the other luthier houses, and they didn't want anything to do with it. One of them did, or at least they were interested, and they toyed with the idea, and they had it for like a year. And by this time, I'd added the zero bars, so like the functionality of it was superb and super, super easy and accurate to use. And they toyed with it for about a year and decided that they didn't have enough time to really take it where they wanted to. And so I got it back, and I was so bummed. I'm like, oh man, I still have to deal with these tools. And so I started selling them. Well, I found a new machinist locally, who actually has become a good friend of mine. But then I started selling them just under the Ensor Guitars brand. And so anytime I do like a local event or a guitar show, like I went out to Santa Barbara, I'd sell them under just my brand.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually came into a relationship with a good friend of mine who's a tattoo artist who is, unlike a lot of my peers, very, very smart in business. He's built himself up. You know, I think I've seen that you've got a couple of small tattoos. He's a tattoo artist with a 1.5-year wait list.
Wow.
Which is unheard of. He knows about branding, he knows about marketing, and him and I fostered this friendship and started talking, and he saw the potential in the tools before I really did. And he was like, but you've got to brand these things. So they were going out completely unbranded. They could have been sold by, or resold by anyone, knocked off by anyone. Mm-hmm. So I started developing the idea in my head of like what I wanted the brand to be, what I wanted it like stylized to represent, how I wanted to differentiate it from the other brands on the market. And then I actually had a literal brand. It was a metal hardened piece of steel that I would press into the binding jigs. And that was the first time I started branding the tools. And about the same time as whenever I finally launched the website. So before, it was all on the Ensor Guitar site. Everything was via email, and I have to manually process each order and thank God for the clients I had at the time, because they were completely patient with me. And, there were times there'd be 40 emails back and forth to sell one binding
Oh
jig.
man. Yeah.
So I immediately, I started thinking about what needs to get better. And the first thing was I have to have a merchant ready site. So it's easy for people, because that was just too much overhead, both for me and the client. Weeks and weeks of emails to be like, what's your shipping address? How do you want to pay?
Yeah.
Nobody has time for that. Amazon has pretty much set the standard. We all have to try to live up to it.
Of course.
So I spent a few months building the website, building the content before I launched, getting as many tutorials done as I could, which, as you know, tutorials are always fun because you can't undo something. So you have to wait till you have a process ready for that tool or whatever you're showcasing, do that process, hope the video and audio turned out. So it was definitely a few months of work getting that ready. But then I launched it, and the feedback from the community has just been overwhelming. Not only did it gain exposure for the brand, it's kind of been a back and forth. I get people contacting me regularly like, hey, I struggle with this or that. Can you come up with something? So for me, it's allowed me to be a larger part of a community that I really appreciate and love. And really help people out. The idea, Elevate is the brand, but the slogan is Next Level Lutherie. So the idea is really helping people elevate their brand or elevate their building and get to that next level.
I think that kind of really nicely takes me on to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, the lutherie community, which, as you said, is a hugely supportive one. It's a very close knit one, but also the kind of the state of the union in modern, what I kind of refer to as modern lutherie. I feel like we're in this place right now where everybody is learning so much from everybody else, through social media and kind of online forums, and everybody seems to be very open and giving with information that I can almost track and see the level of lutherie just climbing and climbing. And I went to the show last month, and just the quality of lutherie on display is just incredible. And I kind of wanted to get your take on that and where you see the industry going, and what your view is on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think the thing that's kind of shocked me the most, whenever I first started, I was such a child, literally in many senses. So I didn't really think about research or anything like that. And so it took me a certain number of guitars to really have some sort of even rudimentarily refined product. And now I see these builders that are posting number 3 and number 4 that are just stellar. I will say, I think all of us have kind of figured out, sometimes you can fool things in photography, make things look.
Oh yeah. Of course.
Photoshop, lighting, whatever you want to do. But I'm a part of a local luthiers group a few hours away from here in St. Louis. And I saw a guy's work recently, I think it was number 12 or something. And even his finish was good. And I think we all know finish is just such a bear. So yeah, the sea levels have definitely risen in a sense. And it's nice to see the new generation sharing information so freely. It's other industries and even some of the old timers that I've met. There's a local archtop builder. He's retired now, but when I first met him, he's you'd have to pay me to get the information out of me, But I think the internet has changed that. And I think that change has also built a sense of community. because while we're all in the same like market niche, we're all sharing a customer base. We are and we aren't competing. Because the people that want a Tom Sands guitar don't necessarily want an Ensor, you know? And so I want you to build the best guitar that you can build. And at the same time, I'm going to build the best one I can. And so there's this like camaraderie there of like, let's all just like blow people away and build the most amazing thing we can, and each have our own like artistic statement on our work.
Yeah, I think that's a really great philosophy and a really great way to look at. It's I think it's a really healthy attitude to have, to be able to be friends and colleagues without kind of secretly backbiting each other and not wanting to share and being insular. I think sharing and growing together, and all of us kind of working to raise the bar is just such a beautiful thing. Yeah. It's one that the community is one that I'm very, very thankful for.
For sure. Yeah, and so for me, my business has definitely shifted to being a machinist. That's what I do full time. And so I love that community so much that I've, at first, I think part of the resistance to machining was the idea that I would lose some of that community. Mm-hmm. And so by building the Elevate brand, it's been quite the opposite, because not only am I still a part of the community, I think I'm more engaged in it than I ever have been. And it's growing as well, because, a lot of the community was built in the past by going to trade shows or being parts of forums and different groups. So now I have people coming to me that need my help or assistance in something they're doing. And so the community that I'm a part of is growing on its own and in a natural way. And so I'm extremely grateful that not only have I not lost the community by becoming a machinist, but that it's flourishing.
Are you still getting a chance to build guitars though?
So I just built what will be probably my last one for a while. Oh my gosh, it turned out so amazing. We did it as a trade. And so it's this very, very collaborative build. The cool part for me was it echoed back to my first commission and my first guitar that I built with Sergey. So like it shares extremely similar specs to both of those two builds if you were to combine them. But it gave me a chance to work through all of those things in the level of building that I'm at now. And it was just little things. By this time, my sense of individual style and artistry is much more developed than it was then, where I was very much mimicking different people that I'm a fan of. So on this last build, first off, for me, I'm very much into a stylized minimalism.
Sure.
So like I don't do large inlays. I've had one guitar, or I guess two or three, that have really large inlays. One of which Craig Lavin did. His work is impeccable. But if it's like, if I get to be involved in the specs, it's very minimal. And so he actually is a minimalist. And so we got to do everything very refined. Like every detail was very specific. And so it was so enriching for me to be a part of. It turned out so beautifully. I'm so proud of every detail. And it feels like the perfect exclamation on the end of a chapter.
Wow.
So I've actually sold off all of my guitar wood except one set, essentially because I built my boys a guitar. The idea that they would share it. And then it turns out my youngest, I think, is a lefty.
Oh, wow.
So I saved enough wood to build one more. And then I have this odd dream of building an electric someday. I've never even dabbled in electrics, but if Joel Michaud can do it, maybe I can do something half as good.
Well, speaking of Joel, he's actually coming to stay with us this evening. And I've got to go and pick him up from the bus station in a little bit. So, and that guitar was killer, by the way. I saw it at the Montreal show, and it was amazing. But before I let you go, I wanted to ask a slightly more whimsical question, which was if we were to have a fantasy dinner party this evening, and you're allowed to bring one guest. It can be somebody from the past. They can be living or dead. Don't bring them if they're dead. They can be alive when they come to the party, or they can be imagined. They can be from fiction or otherwise. Who would you bring and why?
So I would most definitely bring my grandfather. He is not related to me by blood. He's a step-grandfather. But that man has been so incredibly influential in my life. Just to have kind of like an odd picture of who he is. He just turned 81, 82. He's over 80. He is an elk hunting guide in Colorado. So good at his job, people can't keep up with him.
Wow.
So his quality of life is something I definitely esteem to reach. But he's one of those guys, like, he'll say things, and you don't realize that it's a tidbit of wisdom until, like, you stop and think, and you're like, wait a second, like, you can hear the words, but until you really think about it and, like, get under the surface, like, there's a lot more meaning to, like, the little stupid things that you think are just, like, grandpa jokes.
Sure.
So, like, yeah, that man, like, ever since I was a kid, has been so incredibly influential in my life. I would love to have dinner with him tonight.
Oh, man. Well, I hope I get an invite as well, because he sounds like just the kind of guy that I'd like to meet as well.
Yeah, for sure. You also bring Joel, too.
What's that, sorry?
You also bring Joel, too.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll totally bring Joel. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day today. I know you're very busy with your machining work, and I'm so glad to hear that Elevate is on the up and up. If you'll excuse the pun.
All right, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Interval. Please like, share, and subscribe. We've got some amazing things lined up in future episodes. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We've also got our YouTube channel, and we are on Medium and TikTok as well.